Hello, everybody. Welcome to another session of PRPOI this Saturday. Our session today is a Women's Day special, and it's called Don't Break the Bias, or Does the Bias Cut Both Ways? Today, we are looking at a world where women are storming all the bastions, they're entering into all sorts of fields, and yet there are times when we all tend to typecast them. We think they're too aggressive, they're too bossy, they're too meek, so the biases work both ways, and our session today is not about breaking the bias, but about don't break the bias and learn to lead from it. We have three very interesting panelists joining us today. This session is being done in association with our media partner, Ad Gully, and we're very grateful for them for supporting us for this. I'd also like to thank my content curators, Tarunjit Ratan and Pooja Trehan. I'm going to, without further ado, quickly introduce our panelists so that we can deep dive into this discussion. Our first panelist is Nimisha Iyer Thakkar. She's Director Marketing Communications, MEASA Frost and Sullivan. And she brings over 16 years of experience in PR and corporate communications, where she has been implementing communication strategy across South Asia and Middle East. She's been instrumental in sustaining and growing the brand equity of the company in the region. Welcome to our panel today, Nimisha.
Thanks, Sonali. Thanks for the warm welcome. Look forward to being here.
Great. I'm going to just introduce our other panelists as well, Nimisha. Our next panelist is Rozelle Laha. She's Senior Manager Corporate Communications, Coinswitch, Kuber, business journalist turned communication specialist with over a decade of industry experience. She has worked with Hindustan Times, a leading national daily, and other prominent publications like Fortune India, Businessworld, and the Ken. And she is currently making the register ring at Coinswitch, India's largest crypto investing app. Hi, Roselle. How are you?
Hello, Shanali. Thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure this is going to be awesome.
Same here. I'm really looking forward to this panel as well. And I'm going to quickly introduce our next panelist and final panelist so that we can begin our discussion today. This is Rebecca Edwards. She's Content Head Basis, India's financial services destination for women. She's passionate about brand and people management driving product growth. She has 10 plus years of work experience in marketing, brand building, content strategy, digital expansion, and advertising. She has worked with players across e commerce, retail, edutech, healthcare, and most recently, fintech, where she's currently a part of the team building basis. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thanks, Sonali. Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to this panel. I see three women who are in very, very, what used to be typecast or very, I may say, biased as, traditionally masculine fields. And here you are leading content there, talking, creating the narratives for these brands. So I'm sure you have a lot to share with us about breaking the bias or not breaking it. And that's what we're going to discuss today. So I'm going to begin with, of course, letting our audiences get to know a little more about you. Nimisha, I'd love to start with you. Can you share with us a little bit about your journey of how this whole, began and how you ended up here? Would love to know the career trajectory as well.
Okay, so I started off, I was always interested in advertising. I was always interested in brands and, seeing how they work. And of course, to be honest, I actually started my career after I got married. That's where I actually became serious about what I wanted to do. And I actually studied after I got married. And then after I got into PR, it always got me interested. I worked with an agency. I was with IPAN. And from there on, there's been no looking back. I mean, it's always been growing into brands, into strategies. I have moved to more of a consulting, serious business B2B space. But yeah, it's been wonderful, from here. And I think with every opportunity move, I mean, the work and the the canvas of work that we do has grown exponentially. It's far more innovation. It's far more interesting activities, and thinking out of the box that we need to do in the field. It's constantly evolving.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you for that. Roselle, we'll come to you. Your trajectory is very interesting. You've switched, sorry about that. You switched
God
from
bless.
one side of journalism to a very, very, I would say, nascent, exciting field. So, can you tell us how that happened?
Sure. First of all, thank you once again for having me here. I come from a very small town in Kolkata and started my career as a journalist. And worked, like you said, worked across a bunch of publications covering various aspects of business. For and also worked on IT internet businesses, very similar to things that I do right now. Spend a brief time with a global PR firm also. That helped a lot to understand the other side of the business. And finally, switch to corporate communications, working very closely with the promoters in technology firms, and now, of course, a wealth tech company. So, to answer your point on how that happened, I think over a period of time, I realized that you have to really the basis is all about storytelling, right? You are either telling it for the newspaper or telling it for the brand. And over a period of time, the way the industry was moving, i I was always a business person at heart. I always wanted to understand the business from within the company. So covering business for so many years, I think, got me really excited. And of course, my brief stint with a PR firm, that was Weber Shandwick, got me a good, entry into the world of strategic communications and crisis management. That was something, it is like, living every day from one fire to the other. And that's something got me really interested. And, I mean, that's how I'm here today, working for the wealth tech firm I'm with.
Thank you. That lovely journey, Roselle, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot more anecdotes around that. I'm going to come to Rebecca. Rebecca, can you tell us how the journey moved from you, e-commerce, retail, and then now finance, and that also finance for women? How did that happen?
Well, I actually started off my career in HR, being a people person, wanted to work with people, but somewhere along the line, shifted that focus to brands and, building on their narrative, telling their stories, targeting their audiences. I don't have a tech background. So while the initial few years of my career were in retail and e-commerce, because I think the barriers to entry in those spheres are much lesser for women. I think that's changing now, and which is why I decided to, get into something new, something which I didn't necessarily know about, and that is fintech. I think it's all part of a learning process, and there was a time when you had to study for what you worked in, but I think that's graduated, and we'll be talking a lot about that and how that bias is shifting across the spectrum. So yeah, that's how I've ended up at Basis.
Okay, I'd love one of you to address this question, and Rebecca, that's inspired by you. So I want to ask that: do you think overall communications as an industry is, more favorably biased towards women?
I think the barriers to entry in the communications industry is far lesser than if you look at other spheres or other industries. But pointing out to something that Nimisha said, it's not always the case that we see a lot of women in leadership positions, right? Because as you go higher up the rung or higher up the ladder, we see women, in a minority. But yeah, I do think that the communication industry does have significantly lower barriers, and that's why perhaps it's women, female dominated.
So do you think it's something that comes naturally to women? Are women more, again, are we, and is that, again, are we biased because we are seeing that men are not communicative enough and women are better at communication? Nimisha, you're smiling, so I'm going to ask you to answer that question. You're mute.
Yeah. So I think as far as communications industry per se is concerned, yes, this is one place where we are biased because let's face it, look at men and women, and I'm sorry to create this comparison, but when there are issues, okay, look at how we handle issues. Men like the issues to get solved on their own. They don't address it head on. Whereas women, the minute there are issues, I don't think we can live with them. We would like to solve it right there and then. And I think communicate, discuss with whoever are the stakeholders involved within our companies to ensure that that issue is solved immediately. Whereas men will, wait, have their time to, and they have that these things. I think women per se are, they tend to communicate better, and are, problem solving is faster, according to me. And that's the reason why you see a lot of women in communications, where it's more of crisis handling, understanding, understanding the situation, acting instinctively. I think we as women, because we play so many roles, are, we're instinctively used to reacting, and reciprocating.
Okay, so I have another question to ask, and Rosal, maybe you can answer it. So maybe women are good at communication, but how are they handling communication in fields which, it's been a boys' club till yet, right? So, like, say you take finance, you take crypto, you take, you know, uh, tech to quite an example, and there's enough instances we all have in the real world of it being a boys club. How do women navigate that space as communicators? Because ultimately, what Nimisha said, we are great at communication, but can we manage to create narratives in these fields?
Um, I will answer that question in a slightly longer form. Let's zoom out a little bit, Janali. India has a population of 1.2 billion people, out of which 48% around comprise women. If you look at the technical roles, it's just 26 odd percent, according to Zenov Intel data I was reading, sometime earlier this week. And if you look at overall corporate India, that would be around 30% of women. And if you look at the leadership, just 11%, right? And we all, of course, saw how the whole entrepreneur world is like, right? It's 136 unicorn startups, and five of them are female led, and of course one or two of them who we really know and are really relatable as well. It looks like a small number, right? But then few years back we did not even have that one female in that space. So I think and of course, like most women leading businesses were family businesses, and the understanding was that it's the father's business that the woman is leading, and she's not really building, right? I think we have come a long way from there. Like, I personally believe, and I may be super optimistic here, that this is going to go up. This is that the momentum has really picked. Now, coming to your point on the specifics of the company, I think it's pretty. My answer would be pretty much similar to all sectors alike, not just fintech and tech. I have worked with both. I have also worked like Rebecca with a FMCG and retail company where, of course, the diversity was more, right? And it was easier. But as I moved into the tech roles, of course, a lot of times I entered the room and, I saw men. And eventually I figured that, okay, let me think they are just people. They are working towards that one goal of, making the meeting the business objectives with their respective verticals. So let's just kind of call them people, right? So it was a conscious effort, but it was not easy. But I think three things that worked for me, and I understand a lot of listeners here are also kind of, I'm sure at some point of their career would face it, or would have already been seen it. I think three things that worked for me: seeking clarity on growth path before joining any company, that I am joining as XYZ. Over the next 5 years, what would it look like? And then setting goals in alignment with the business goals, and then talking numbers. Promoters understand data, and most promoters in India are men. And I think that has kind of worked for me in these sectors. So even if I don't understand, I'm not a tech pro or a fintech pro, I understand the business, I align with what the business needs, what success really means to the manager and the promoters, and then work backwards from there. So, we are talking numbers, we are no more talking gender. That somehow has worked for me, but again, I think I have been fortunate to work with some of the good companies. I feel, yeah.
That's a very interesting point, but I'm going to take that last sentence of yours and I'm going to address it to Rebecca. So, Rebecca, you are talking finance and you're also talking gender. You're, you know, how do you make that balance? How do you make your communication relevant? And do
Okay.
you feel a bias when you talk to a more mainstream audience?
Okay. I think reality speak like if you're speaking realistically, we do see, at least in the area of fintech, a very male dominated industry, and that's where basis comes in. Take something as simple as health insurance or credit. Women aren't given covers which look into things like ovarian cancer or PCOS, right? Women's healthcare costs are higher, but our insurance policies are designed for men. Taking away from that, if I'm looking at what basis does, and especially from a personal point of view as well, I don't think we as women are asking for a special seat at the table. Yeah, I think we want to reach a point where we're not defined by our gender, right? I think for us, it is about building on a product or building a product for a highly underserved market when it comes to women. And while that does touch upon gender equality, when it comes to communication, I think our content is directed at both men and women because, like you said, we need to include our men in this narrative, right? If we want to build upon it further. And that's where basis comes in because at the end of the day, we're talking finance for our with our brothers, our dads, our partners, our spouses, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Coming to you, Nimisha, I want to understand one thing from you. You mentioned in our earlier conversation before the panel started that you've actually never encountered a bias because of your gender. Yeah.
Yes.
So, do you feel that, a lot of this is today changing? Have we reached a more equitable workplace in the past few years with more and more women entering the workplace?
So I'll tell you one thing. I think this whole thing about men, women, I think we need to, not talk that. And I think we need to look at us as individuals who are there for a purpose. We're there for a role. We're there to achieve what the company has set out to do. What are their overall business objective, as Rozelle mentioned. And it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman. I think at the end of it, as long as you're aligned to the company's objectives, company's goals, and you're constantly contributing to that growth, you're constantly a part of that growth story. I don't think anyone will face the bias. I think, and that is so. And this particular aspect is not something which only men, or like women, have to follow. It's even applies for men, right? We all have to work towards a particular goal. The minute you don't, you are gonna face resistance. So yeah, I mean, thankfully, I've not faced any bias. And to be very honest with you, if you're aligned, if you know your work well, if you're talking business, I think as women, we get serious hearing. I mean, I know people in my team will look up to me, will hear me out because I'm talking something which makes sense, and it's what they're looking out for. At the end, what matters is ROI, for all of us. So I think as long as
True.
you're aligned, it doesn't matter.
That I completely understand. But I want to ask a question, Roselle. What about you? Did you face any biases, and can you give us an example of a bias you may have faced in the real world as well, apart from just work? Very important to understand that. Roselle, you're muted. You're on mute.
Sorry. Let me first tell you one thing, okay? Let me preface it by saying that, well, I continue to make conscious efforts to make sure that my voice is heard. I come from a family where giving 10 rupees to the son was very difficult. I mean, was very easy, and that 10 rupees going to a woman was tough. And this was the extended family. I'm a single child. only daughter in the house, but then it was there. So I have seen that patriarchy very early on in my life. And luckily, I kind of, studied from an army school where, we were all punished for going late to school, for instance, and we were all spending 30 minutes kneeling down on the basketball court, being punished equally for breaking disciplines, men and women. So luckily I've seen both sides somehow, and that has stayed with me even today. So when I fight for something, when I stand for something, I stand by it. I would say that this is why I'm doing it. And if you don't agree with it, give me a reason for it, not because I'm a woman saying it, or maybe in a lot of places, like I was one of the least experienced people in the team. Also, age has also been a barrier in a lot of cases, right? Now, to give specific examples, of course not the right platform, and don't want to be bashing, but yeah, I mean, I have been in rooms where people with 20-25 years of experience gave an idea to a promoter, and I said that, but this doesn't align with the ROI goals for the quarter. And then I have had cold battles after that, made my life difficult, got late night calls, people saying bunch of things. But what has really worked, and I'm talking about people who are also well known in the industry at large, right? So it is not easy to stand up to those people. But what has worked for me is that I've been able to articulate that challenge without, disrespecting that person, that, this is how, things were playing out offline because this happened here. And is there a way to collaborate better? Because eventually, if we are not part of two different teams, we are working towards your company, your goal. It was not easy being young, being woman in a male dominated company. This is about a couple of years back that happened, right? And I was even younger, and it was not easy. Like, I remember going back to my mother and saying that, Mom, I'm unable to do this. Like, I cried. And she was like, you have come a long way because of your conviction about certain things. And you should do the same thing here. It's just work, but your values are your values, right? So I think we all face it at some point or the other. What is important is to see how you articulate it without very respectfully. And sometimes it works out. That company, it worked out for me. I stayed on, but sometimes it doesn't, and you have to live with it. Like, you have worked hard to build your skills, not for the organization, for your own self. Some companies will appreciate it, some companies will not. So sooner you get off that ship, the better it is, I think. So yeah, that's my way of looking at it. You're on mute, Shonali.
So while we were all speaking, I've received a very tough question, I would say, or an interesting question. I don't know how you all would like to look at it. On from one of our audience, and I cannot resist but pick it up, even though it's a little different. So the question is, why are there no men on this panel? A discussion on gender balance diversity is not complete without being on the same table. Thoughts? Would somebody like to take it up? Rebecca, would you like to go?
I I I I don't know. I'd rather not get into a gender of throwing gender at each other to justify a fact. However, yes, I do believe that gender diversity is a topic which would welcome a panel of both men and women, just not today, considering it's International Women's Day and all that. So
Thank
I
you.
think
I don't think
I
any
think
of
I
us.
I think I may want to take a stab at it. I feel that I think whoever the person is, thanks for raising that, and it is true, right? I mean, we are, it's a womanil, if that's the right term for it, woman panel. But I feel that like we discussed a little while ago, that we have a positive gender bias for women in communications. I think there are more opportunities for all of us to come together as women and talk more, because unless women interact with each other, understand from each other's learnings, having a man on the panel is just going to be talk, right? Unless we stand up for each other and learn how to walk the talk, talk the walk, everything, having a man on the panel will be more about this is what we want to do and solution oriented but not implementation oriented. I think those will then again lead to HR policies on papers. That is my way of looking at it. So I see a lot of men talking about women at different places, but walking the talk will only happen when women talk more often. And we have an opportunity in this sector.
So I am taking off from what you said, and I'm going to ask you this question, Nimisha. Do you think that the communication industry is more female dominated, and do men deal with the bias there against them?
Yes. Yes, they do. I would completely agree on that. It is more, and I think, as I explained before, I think communications is about more intuition. It's more, while yes, you do have a larger goal. You do work towards a particular purpose. You are communicating to achieve a certain result, but at the end, it's understanding the pulse of humans, right? It's about understanding, and I think women, just for the different roles that we play, do understand different situations and can handle it in a better way. I would say that. So yes, we do face a bias in the communications industry, but it's just the nature of the industry, right? I mean, each let's face it, men and women have their strengths, right? So I think we, at the end, it's what we relate to, and you'll see far and far more people. Like, for example, in HR you will see more women, in communications you'll see more women, in healthcare you'll see more women, in life sciences industry you'll see more women, in customer research you will see more women. Is And it's not that it's that's just that we're trying to do a divide. It's just that something that we relate more to. And I would also want to address the person who's brought up that there are no men on the panel. I would take that point. However, there are, as we say, the percentage of conversations happening with all women panel are far few. So we need to have that balance, right? We need all women to be heard as much as there are so many panels happening with all men, and when no women perspective is the thing. So I think this forum is just trying to balance, the ecosystem. Yeah, we need a
So
balance.
I thank you for that, Nimisha. So Rebecca, I have a question to ask you, and I want to ask you this, and this is something we are discussing a lot, and something that Nimisha also pointed out. Do you think that when it comes to senior leadership positions, there is still a bias against women? There is still a glass ceiling?
I do believe that there very much so still remains a bias, especially when it comes to leadership. And I've mentioned this before, that you see a large percentage of women across industries drop out before they complete 5 years of work experience. And while we're not here to discuss the reasons that they do, we are here to discuss why that trickles down into leading us with into getting us into a place where there are far less women who are in charge of making key decisions. And that's where I think the problem lies. Like Nimisha and Rozelle stated, I think there are things and qualities about us as women, like nurturing, which is why we tend to gravitate towards healthcare, or communicating better. Yeah, that's why we tend to gravitate towards communication. But I do see that even in these industries, as you go towards the top, there is an apparent gap. And a lot of that is because we take women as being emotional, right? We do not consider that they could often make decisions based on both emotion as well as practicality or rationale. Yeah, that's a huge bias that we face across the board, right? And I'm not saying that only men participate in that. Even we as women are biased against other women at times for these very reasons. And but things are changing. Of course, a lot of women are standing up, not changing themselves as women, but rather trying to change a fundamental problem, which is, gender based, right? So, yeah.
So I'm gonna again have this question on the floor, and the question is: with half the population of the human species is female, what is stopping women from creating more opportunities, supporting more women? And do you think that women can become the game changer for their gender? Who would like to take it?
I'll let Nimisha or Rozelle take the question, but I do think that we women are game changers already for our genders, right? Otherwise, we all wouldn't be here. So, yeah, go ahead, guys.
I would, yeah, I mean, I would completely agree with Rebecca. I mean, we already are game changers, so we are, and I see, I think, look at the way we are bringing up our children today. I think we're not, I mean, most of us, we are encouraging our girls, to go out there, do what they want, to pick up things that interest them, be it sports, be it football, be it, you know, uh, uh, just going being as part of the space industry. I mean, it's just we are pushing those boundaries, and I think we are seeing the new age families taking up that initiative. I think as mothers, we are seeing us taking those initiatives of telling our girl child to push the boundaries and do what they feel like. Yeah. So yeah.
I
I
think the
think
more important question is what are we doing with our boy children? Because I think we've done a lot to develop the girls, but the a world where women are very evolved with unprepared men is also going to be a little complicated, right?
I think the younger generation, especially Gen Z, I think we as sisters, mothers, friends, female influences have a lot more freedom in enabling our boys to be better, right? And if you look at the younger generation, there's obviously a larger sense of empathy and fairness. We see a lot of boys, or rather males, participating in fighting for equal rights for women, right? So, yeah, we're getting there for sure. I think it's the older folk that we need to address for the most part.
What do you think, Roselle?
Um, I have a slightly different view. I think a lot of women go through very tough challenges before they reach the top. The 11% that I spoke about have really struggled their way to the top, right? And others are in the journey. A lot of startups are creating the leadership pipeline and talking about moving the needle, and a lot of progress have been made there. But people on the top, and I have worked across multiple industries, and talking from that experience, are not very approachable because they have reached a certain position. They feel that the others also should kind of struggle and see the hard work efforts and move there. That number is very few, but then that is still there. I think one thing that I personally believe we need to remember is that we need to treat people the way we expected to be treated when we were in their stage of career. I think I have not seen that enough. Most of my mentors are still men. I have tried helping women in women-led companies in the past and failed miserably. There were men who stood up for those women in the end, explained why it is important from a diversity perspective, and so on. So I think somewhere women need to understand that we need more women. At the same time, the skills part of things, yes, I feel that the liberal arts graduates comprise of a lot of women, and a lot of tech and IT companies are probably expanding their diversity pool in terms of the education background. I think that will also help a lot of women come into the workforce with softer skill sets that help, not just typical soft skill led professions like communications and so on, but also some of the areas where you can soft skills, reasoning, logical thinking kind of helps, and that's a part of the entire business spectrum, I feel.
That's a very interesting perspective. Now I'm going to ask you a very, very, strange question, and I this is something that has begun to, needle me also. When we talk about a more equitable workplace, we've divided the world into men and women, but somehow we are living still in a very heteronormative world where it is, as we were talking, cisgender men, cisgender women, and we are getting a world which is becoming increasingly more diverse. I mean, I am seeing youth today much more ready to embrace a different identity or even sense of gender than ever before. Are we ready to encounter the bias against that? I'm sorry, it's a very tough question, I know, but I think
Is it
we
for me?
for all of you to answer that, because I just feel that today we are living in a world which is going to go beyond the traditional gender roles. Gender and identity as itself are becoming things in a state of flux. How do you see this evolving? I mean, do you feel, for instance, that a more equitable world, or a world where women have more power, will give rise to greater diversity? Will that allow us to bring in more genders and more senses of identity into the equation in the professional workplace? Nimisha, I think you're mute.
Gender diversity, answering your question specific on do we need more diversity at workplace? Yes, we do. Are we moving in that direction? A lot needs to be achieved. There is a lot of, we're starting. I think we're at the starting point. Uh, and it's in phases, right? Like you have certain countries who are more acceptable and some who are not. Within a country you have the metros and the children and the upbringing out there, being far more acceptable versus the rurals, or the others who are not even aware of something like this, who have a completely different mindset. So I think we're in different stages, but we are progressing. And I do know of a lot of companies who have taken initiatives for promoting diversity. There have been trainings done with employees about sitting down with them, and if you face someone who are diverse, who have different preferences, how do you deal with them? How do you respond to them? What is it that is not right to tell them? So there is sensitivity which companies are realizing, and there is training across the board of how to behave, how to treat, and and have a very good work culture, and a diverse work culture.
Thank you for that. Anyone else has a viewpoint on this? Or should we move ahead? Roselle.
I think pretty much in agreement what Nimisha said. I think at the end of it, and to add to that, of course, if we keep looking at diversity as just women and men, then we are going to be stuck in that loop, right? So we somewhere
Yes.
need to break that loop. The more we look into the talent pools, we expand the participation, the scope for participation for all genders. I think it's more to do with expanding the talent pool rather than focusing on just diversity. Then we will be making conscious efforts to, it's like, if you, it's like the same quota problem, right? I mean, you don't want to be treated by a doctor just because, operated by a doctor just because there was a quota to be filled and the doctor came in. At the end of the day, it has to be the merit, right? And the merit will happen when you look at talent mapping in a more holistic way, rather than just getting engineers to do XYZ and comms people to do XYZ. A bunch of professions like headhunting, comms, like Rebecca herself is from an HR side, and she's, I mean, so mapping skill sets to job is somewhere that we need to graduate towards, rather than just having the conventional background and coming to it. So if you expand the talent pool, the diversity will grow. You don't need to make targeted efforts to get more women on the board. Then it will always be a woman man conversation.
Yeah, so I think that is something that we all need to move beyond, right? I mean, we have to make it a more diverse workplace. I want to ask, we have a question from the audience, and that is, how would you mentor young women talent in communications to prepare themselves in the real world situations full of bias? So bias is there. Rosal, you've said that. Rebecca, you've said that. Nimisha, you've been lucky enough to not encounter it, but I'm sure that somewhere in life you may have, if not at work, then somewhere else you may have encountered it. How do we how do we mentor young women to deal with the boys clubs who say, do you think that is breaking now? Is there a way to teach them to go ahead and forge ahead?
Speak up. Just speak up. Talk more. That's it.
Yeah, don't
And
hold
don't,
back.
yes, and when it comes to salaries, ask for it. Women have this whole shyness, and this is someone else told me, some global leader from EY I was once meeting. She told me this thing, that women don't ask enough. And that's why they are like, okay, so we have this whole, we are kind of born with that, that in skill set that, okay, we will make with, do what we have with where we are, and so more with less kind of an approach, but doesn't work with salaries. If you're doing equal amount of job as your male counterparts, ask for it, and prove yourself that you deserve it, right? I mean, live up to it. I think that's important. And like, I mean, going by my experience in one of my past companies, like I said about that particular person I had to stand up against, I personally feel that, talking helps. Till the time I talked, I did not know that I have supporters within the system. Then others came up and said that, hey, we are facing similar problems. So it just takes one woman to stand up. So yeah.
I think that's shown in the Harry Weinstein thing. But I wanted to ask you, Rebecca, do you think that young women in communications need to be prepared? I mean, as Rozelle has pointed out, the gender pay gap, and I think, do you think women are still biased again, especially when it comes to money, finance, when it comes to being paid equitably, to getting good funding?
Um, if I had to put it simply, I think we as women always fail to give ourselves enough credit, which is ironic. That is Basis's current product. It's built around that premise, but figuratively, we fail to ask for what we deserve, right? And like Rozelle pointed out, we assume we're not good enough, or rather, society often tells us we're not good enough, or we're intimidated by our male counterparts, even if the opportunities are there, right? I think that's changing, and especially for the younger generation, I would agree wholeheartedly with Nimisha and Rozelle. Ask for what you want, fight for what you want. You have to. I mean, at least I personally believe that you need to get yourself heard, put yourself out there, and challenge yourself, most importantly, right? That doesn't mean you go fighting with everybody who passes an unfavorable comment or an unpleasant comment. But I do think that there are areas where we need to make our voices heard, and that's where it comes down, things like money, yeah, pay parity, yeah, things like benefits as a woman in a workplace, stuff like that. But yeah, I
That's a
think
very interesting observation, Rebecca. And I want to come to this question, which I want to address to all of you, because many of you are today, leading teams. There is a very strong bias against women being assertive, being aggressive. I face that as a female. There have been times when people have come to me and said, "Oh, but you don't behave like a typical female boss," And I'm like, "What does that mean? So you're supposed to be moody. You're supposed to be this. You're supposed to be that. You're supposed to keep grudges." So, do you think there is a bias against women in leadership positions? Are we, if women are more assertive or they speak their mind, like you all said, are they seen to be bossy, or are they seen to be viragos of some sort?
I do think so, that we still face that bias, but
Rebecca, you're muted.
sorry. I do think we face that bias when it comes to leadership, but I would like to reach a point where we as women, uh, we're not defined, our reactions are not defined by our gender, right? So it's not a woman being aggressive. She was very aggressive. It's just that the individual was assertive. It has nothing to do with gender. However, we are pitted like that, right? And we women often pit ourselves against each other as well, unfortunately. But things are changing, and yeah, we're all actively contributing to that change.
Okay, that's
I'll
good
give,
to know. Yeah, Rosal.
I'll give a real example. It happened to me, and I'm a bit outspoken, I think, thanks to my background in journalism, where I kind of, was taught to speak out more often. I was in a company, my initial days in corporate communications, very early on, and a guy said something on a call, and I said, okay, fine. So I kept silent. And after the call, my manager said, I think you should call him up and say that, hey, let's kind of, catch up over coffee and all and make it up. I said, why me? Why not him? My then manager came back to me asking that you are right. I mean, I just thought that probably it just makes sense that you approach and do it, but you are right. Let's set up a call and let's do it on the call. I'll be part of the call. And he did it. So I think somewhere it's just obvious that the girl will take care of things. She's softer and she knows how to kind of smile and make peace. But I think sometimes asking that small why is important. It took me 2 3 days, a lot of guts, of course, to go up and say why me, why not him. And it was a very natural question, but I think it had a lot of you know positivity later on, because I have seen that person doing it with other colleagues later on. So I was happy that at some point they are now thinking that woman is not the one to make peace all the time. There's a problem, it has to be solved. The colleague needs to solve the problem, not the gender. So yeah, that I
So,
just wanted to share. I mean, it is real, like it happened. So yeah, sorry.
just another, very interesting question, and Nimisha, I'd like to begin with you, which is that is there any bias you would like to keep?
I don't have like a direct in my head a bias that I would like to keep. I think it's situation, it's circumstances, and the way I would react. I don't think it would be basis on, oh, I think only like I don't think personally. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but I don't have preconceived notions of how things should be or who can do it best. It's just according to the circumstances, look at the situation and react accordingly and do what you think is right. So I don't know if this I honestly don't have an answer that I would like to keep an eye bias. No, I wouldn't.
Okay, fair enough. What about you, Rebecca? Do you think that there is a bias we need to keep? I mean, you've been very vocal about the fact that women do have still face a lot of biases in different places, maybe not in over overtly, but inadvertently, while through finances, through financial systems, through banking systems, through systems basically, might be still creating those barriers for women. So, do you think there is a bias that you would like to keep?
I think the term bias is very relative, right? What's considered biased for somebody may not necessarily be considered biased. It could be considered very open minded, the other end of the spectrum. I think I have a fundamental problem with the fact that there exists bias in the first place. So I hope we work towards. I don't think there's any bias that I would like to keep. I just hope we reach a point where we don't have to use that term quite as often.
Fair enough. What about you, Rosal?
Yeah, completely in alignment with what Rebecca said. My thing would be remove the word bias from the dictionary altogether. I think so. I mean, just don't keep the word bias. Forget about keeping any bias. Just go with the flow.
Okay. How would you, as comms professional, advise companies to, remove biases or reduce biases through internal and external communications? Nibisha, again, I'll begin with you. I've got a very interesting question where somebody in the audience is saying the beginning of the bias starts from day one when the woman is asked what the husband or father does for a living. Haven't come across men who have been asked that. More sensitivity on the issue is the call. And how do you create a more inclusive work environment that works through comms?
I think is that for me?
I'm beginning with you.
One, this question about women being asked of what a husband or the father does for a living. I mean, it's the way to answer, right? I mean, how simple response should be, how does it matter to the job that I'm doing? I mean, really, how does it matter? So I think, to answer and even the question about what we need to do to train the young women is, I think we just need to teach them two things. One, focus on what you're doing and just do it well. That's about it. But have the confidence and speak up, you know. we need to build that confidence of, all the things that we've spoken, as Rebecca mentioned. It's about, we are not confident about ourselves. We tend to be self-critical. I think that is one thing that we need to ensure, that we should be confident. And if they find some question which is inappropriate, like what does your father and husband do, a relative asking me or a friend asking me is a different story. At a workplace, someone asking me, why, how does it matter to you? The minute you start speaking up and asking the question as how does it matter to you, they'll back off. The thing is, we normally tend to, not give back, and we need to start giving back to what's irrelevant.
Fair enough. What about you, Rebecca? What do you think? Well, how do you think that works? How would you advise a communications policy which addresses, having less bias?
I think it starts with speaking up fundamentally. And like Nimisha said, I don't think we need to justify ourselves. I think we just need to understand what the relevance of the question is to what we're doing professionally, right? I do not think that it comes into play with what our dads do or what our partners do or what our brothers do comes into play when you're doing a job. There's a time and there's a place for every kind of question. That being said, yes, we still unfortunately live in a fairly male dominated society. Even the forms we fill out ask us what our dad's names are first before they ask us what our mom's names are. And while I came from a family where there didn't exist a gender bias, society inculcates that, or rather, the way we operate kind of uh, contributes to that. So yes, I agree with Nimisha. I think a typical answer to this question would be, at least if it was me, what is the relevance of the question in a non-argumentative way, of course. Yeah, and I think it's a part of life to face questions like this. We just need to have our answers practiced and somewhere stored at the back of our heads, I think, to just dole them out.
But I want to ask another question to all of you, and I want to ask,
Yes,
are
I want to
yeah,
quickly
sure.
address that question. I know that we are almost close to the time, but
Yeah.
I think I keep saying this to a lot of people, and it's a bit of a privileged way to answer that question. But I think answer that question politely, that my husband does so and so. But a interview, always remember, is not about it's not a one-way street. It also helps you understand the company you are getting into. If you have a choice, don't go for that company where you are not comfortable answering the questions at the interview stage. Slightly privileged way of answering it, but then that's the best way, because you will face more such questions if you join that company. So that's a red flag.
I have another question to ask all of you. Do you think the communications industry itself, because we are in communications, we have a great role which we can play to address these biases or remove them from the equation? Do you think that we can create, at least in communication, we can create policies and systems which address this, where we don't have, say, advertising which is regressive and sexist, where we don't have press releases which push on those biases? Do you think that we as responsible professionals can begin that change internally?
I'd just like to throw in a line here. I think that ideally we need to stop making gender our selling point, right? That's the fundamental thing. We base our products, we base our content, our advertising, even our targeted marketing is gender specific. Over time, I would hope that we gravitate to a place where we don't have to call out gender, right? Um, in the case where we are, like for example, we are at bases we're trying to contribute towards lessening that gap. Obviously our communication and our content is women oriented, but I think that's where you need to create a narrative and a story for your brand, or across the board in the communications industry, which directs your content or your message at both men and women or any other genders that fall across the spectrum.
That's very interesting. Nimisha, you were nodding a lot when I said that. So, do you have anything to say?
Mm, Not specifically. I was agreeing to Rebecca with what she was saying. So yeah, I mean, we can, the narrative of the storytelling at the end. Yes, we need to make it relevant for both the audiences, and there are places where sometimes we can the product does have the bandwidth to do that, but there are times where a particular product is very gender specific. So I think it's just product based. So wherever feasible, yes, we should make a conscious effort to have a narrative that's relevant for both.
But Roselle, crypto is not gender specific. I know lots of women who also invest in it.
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's why we as a company. I'm not a company spokesperson, just saying it on behalf of what I have experienced. I think the good thing is that we have been the commitment is to expand the economic growth, which includes women, right? And interestingly, crypto has seen a lot of excitement around the whole mainstreaming conversations that are going on. And I think it's again by default a lot of young people are coming into that, and a lot of them are women. So if we just talk about our company, I think we have seen almost 500% growth in crypto adoption on our app, right? So and not just investing, but also not investing alone, the 500% are registered users, rise. But what getting to is that if we don't make communication simplified and inclusive, we are not going to reach our commitment of the larger goal. It's not about making people buy crypto, it's about contributing to the larger growth, and that can happen only when we talk to both people alike. So that's like business imperative for us to talk about the simplification of the investing, rather than talking about any particular gender. So yeah.
I'm going to end this panel by one question to each one of you. Nimisha, I'm beginning with you. What does break the bias mean to you personally?
Break the bias is not is to break the mind blocks. Break the mind blocks completely, as in, I think it's about people, right? One person to another. Look at everyone as a human being. I think that's what break the bias means to me. Just look at everyone with human being with the same heart, with the same mind, and treat accordingly.
Okay, thank you. And what about you, Rebecca?
Might be a tad bit philosophical, but I think that change begins with oneself. So I think we first need to break the biases that exist within us, and then maybe kind of focus on doing that across the board in the world, in our workplaces, etc.
Okay. And Roselle,
Walk the talk.
as
just
in,
don't, just don't say that break the bias. We have been saying it for ages now. Time to actually do it, and that includes what Nimisha said and Rebecca said. It comes from oneself. It comes from the without, the within and the without, and it's a mix of both. And while we women say that break the bias, we need to walk the talk, and first forget that we are women and we are just an employee. And like Nimisha mentioned, that the mindset around, right? So yeah, it's a mix of both. So one phrase, walking the talk, is breaking the bias for me.
okay, thank you so much, ladies. That was a very, very interesting panel, and it was really nice to see very diverse viewpoints on all the conversation that we have today around our International Women's Day hashtag. I hope that our audience has had a great educative session with the three of you, and I hope I know these are not easy conclusions to draw with one panel. There's a lot of work that has to be done even now, but it was lovely to have the three of you on our panel. So thank you so much, Nimisha, Rozelle, and Rebecca. It's been a pleasure, and it's been a
Thanks,
really
Sonali.
fun panel to
Thanks,
do as
Nisha.
well. Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Roselle.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. It was a pleasure. Yes.
I'd just like to remind our audience that you will be able to see this on YouTube and on our Facebook page. So if you have more questions for the panelists, please feel free to write in on the session or when you view it. And I would also like to thank AdGully once again for being our media partner. Everybody have a great Saturday, and wishing everyone a very happy International Women's Day in advance.